This week on Christian World News, double standard. Why is the FBI targeting pro-life protesters outside abortion clinics while virtually ignoring attacks on crisis pregnancy centers and churches? Plus, America's largest Protestant denomination lost nearly 500,000 members last year. Guess what? It's not just the Baptists. A new study reveals many Americans are drifting from their faith. And Big George Foreman, a new movie on the life and faith of this two-time heavyweight boxing champ. See the miracle that literally brought him back to life. Hello everyone, welcome to this week's edition of Christian World News. I'm George Thomas. In the United States, Republican lawmakers are accusing the FBI of a double standard in enforcing a law that protects abortion clinics and crisis pregnancy centers. The House Judiciary Subcommittee heard testimony of ongoing attacks against pro-life clinics and churches nationwide. Take a look. Last Wednesday, when Bob Perron saw 3 decapitated animals in front of this pro-life clinic, his first thought?
I would call it some kind of ritualistic attack.
Perron, who heads the Catholic-run JMJ Pregnancy Center in Orlando, told CBN's Faith Wire that he was shocked when he saw the remains of the animals in front of the building.
There was a huge chicken with its head cut off. There was another huge bird with its head cut off, and then a baby lamb that had been decapitated.
The group Catholic Vote says 157 churches and 87 pregnancy resource centers and other pro-life organizations across the country have been attacked since the draft Supreme Court opinion proposing to reverse Roe v. Wade was leaked in May 2022.
And these attacks have included fire bombings and vandalism that includes phrases written in graffiti like, quote, "If abortions aren't safe, neither are you." It included smashing of windows, targeted online harassment, protesters threatening violence outside pregnancy resource centers and churches, and many other acts.
On Monday, Republicans on the House Judiciary Subcommittee held a hearing accusing the Biden administration and the Justice Department of using the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances, or FACE Act, to unfairly target pro-life activists for prosecution.
Let me tell you what that is. That is called selective prosecution in violation of the Constitution. You cannot make prosecutorial decisions because you want to make an example out of somebody who's a well-known anti-abortion or pro-life activist.
Among those who testified was pro-life activist Mark Houck, who was arrested in front of his 7 children last fall during a pre-dawn raid of his home by armed FBI agents for allegedly violating the FACE Act. A jury found him not guilty of the federal charges earlier this year.
They show up at your house, 20 agents, guns drawn, in front of your family, in front of... Why do you think they did it?
The intention was to humiliate me, to scare my children, and to instill fear in pro-life America.
The FACE Act, among other things, makes it a crime to cause damage or destruction to a reproductive healthcare facility or place of worship. Despite the hundreds of attacks against churches and pro-life facilities since last year's abortion ruling, the Justice Department has brought only 4 indictments under the FACE Act against pro-abortion activists, compared to the 26 pro-life activists allegedly facing similar violations.
The Biden administration has shown a clear double standard of enforcing the FACE Act in a way that protects pro-abortion activists and facilities while substantially ignoring attacks on pro-life advocates, facilities, and churches. And it is a disgrace that the Justice Department would rather cater to the pro-abortion political movement than protect places that assist pregnant women in need.
We head overseas, where there's some encouraging story out of Iran, where a judge freed a Christian couple from prison and ruled that participating in a house church is not illegal. Humayun Zaref and his wife Sarah Ahmadiyya are converts from Islam. The judge's ruling goes against a long-term precedent of finding Christian house churches considered a threat to Iran's national security. Violence against religious minorities is increasing around the world. Recently, the United States State Department released its annual report detailing the current status of religious oppression and violence in nearly 200 countries. CBN's Brody Carter shows us how everyone can help those suffering for their faith.
The report shows a rise in this violence and oppression in several countries. I spoke with CBN senior reporter Gary Lane, who's traveled to over 120 countries, and he's witnessed this oppression firsthand. He says the best thing that we can do for religious freedom is to give our time, finances, and prayers.
The key is, how serious are we when it comes to China? If you've got as many as 3 million Uyghurs imprisoned in genocide, and we say it's genocide being committed against them, then what are we doing about it? Why are we still buying Chinese products?
The annual report raises big questions about religious freedom and our part in it. It follows both the good and bad of international religious freedom.
Unfortunately, the report also documents the continuation and, in some instances, the rise of very troubling trends.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken designated these 16 countries of particular concern. Governments in part of the world continue targeting religious minorities, using a host of methods including torture, beatings, unlawful surveillance, and so-called re-education camps.
Religion can be such a powerful force for good in the world. Societies who seek to restrict it or use it to harm others cannot achieve their full potential.
The extensive report notes several concerning hotspots, including attacks on the Catholic Church in Nicaragua, with more than 160 attacks against the church last year. Other crimes against humanity come out of China, where Muslim Uyghurs are suffering genocide and imprisonment for their faith. And notably, the people of Iran, led by the killing of Mahsa Amini, a young woman arrested and beaten by the so-called morality police because her hijab did not fully cover her hair.
So it's a responsibility that we have as Christians, not to just sit on our couches in North America, but to do something about it.
Gary, it's 2023. People are still being persecuted and murdered for their faith, if not more so than ever. Why do you think that is?
In Nigeria, the Fulani herdsmen are being financed to clear Christians out of their villages and off the land because they want the land. In other countries, it's really more of a commitment to theology and doctrine. Like in Iran, Jesus Christ said, they hated me first, but they will also hate you because of me. So Christians are being attacked around the world.
The State Department started observing the International Religious Freedom Act in 1998 when it was signed into law by then President Bill Clinton. Today, the information gathered is used to advance religious freedom in oppressed nations. It's also used to shed light on actions impacting religious freedom and also to preserve and protect that human right for everyone. Brody Carter, CBN News.
Thank you, Brody. Up next, the startling drop in membership in Southern Baptist churches and the new survey that reveals a nationwide trend of people losing faith. A disturbing development in the Southern Baptist Convention. The denomination's membership was down nearly 500,000 in 2022, the largest, by the way, drop in a century. The numbers come from a report released by Lifeway Christian Resources. According to them, total SBC membership went from about 13.7 million in 2021 to 13.2 million in 2022. Reasons include losing older members to the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as several crises in recent years, including a major sex abuse scandal and controversies over race. The problem isn't limited to just one denomination. The fallout from COVID is having a huge impact on faith in America. Troubling new statistics show significant changes in people's views about God and their commitment to spiritual growth. CBN's Billy Holloway explores how the pandemic fueled these sobering shifts.
A new survey reveals the stunning impact COVID-19 had on Americans' religious perspectives. The percentage with a biblical worldview has plummeted to just 4%. Dr. George Barna, director of the Cultural Research Center, finds the results of the American Worldview Inventory report alarming.
First of all, much more extensive than we actually expected. Typically, you don't find that religious beliefs change very much. they're probably the most stable of the factors in a person's life because they relate to worldview that's formed when you're young and it doesn't change much as you age.
Dr. Barna adds that crisis moments like the pandemic can also spark surprising shifts.
We found a number of things that changed in terms of their views of truth, their views about God, their own assessment of their spiritual commitment, some of their moral perspectives, going to church, reading the Bible, acknowledging their sins and asking for forgiveness. Those kinds of things all shifted pretty dramatically.
And the changes aren't limited to the secular world. Only 44% of born-again Christians believe Jesus didn't commit any sins during his life on earth, down from 58% in 2020. And the percentage of those who see a God-given calling or purpose for their lives declined by almost half, from 88% to 46%.
We've really got to sit back and think intelligently and strategically about what are we doing in reference to worldview. As we look at that, what we find is parents are doing next to nothing intentionally. Churches are doing next to nothing intentionally. And so what's happening is that every child is out there as a free moral agent trying to figure out the world. And I say child because a person's worldview is almost fully formed by the age of 13. So it's really with children that we have to focus on what are we going to do to develop that worldview.
Digital evangelist Matt Brown, founder of Think Eternity, agrees.
We need to do the things that Jesus told us to do now more than ever, because there's just never been a time that's more important that we preach the gospel, that we share the message of Jesus with the people around us, that we disciple the next generation. It's so important that we give the next generation a biblical worldview.
Dr. Barna believes church closures during the pandemic and other policies left people shaken up and confused. Still, despite the dire numbers, hope remains.
I think we've still got a little bit of a window of opportunity here where people are trying to figure some things out. This would be a great time for disciple makers to say, you know what? I'm going to start speaking to these issues that are on the minds and hearts of people today. I'm not going to go into esoteric theological conversations. I've got to deal with what people are really wrestling with.
And while the situation might seem sobering or even insurmountable, Brown says starting small and clinging to truth can make all the difference. Billy Hollowell, CBN News.
Thanks, Billy. Up next, he's a two-time world heavyweight champion. George Foreman weighs in about his legendary life as a boxer and a preacher. Hear how he died in his dressing room and then came back to life. Welcome back. George Foreman is a two-time heavyweight boxing champion, a preacher, and the father of 12 children. His latest role is executive producer of a movie about his life. It's called Big George Foreman. Ephraim Graham spoke with Foreman about his new film and his legendary life.
The impossible dream has happened. Heavyweight history has happened. The winner, and once again, heavyweight champion of the world, Big George Foreman.
It's been nearly 30 years since George Foreman's historic return to the ring to become the world's oldest heavyweight champion at age 45. And he is still one of boxing's biggest personalities.
When I made my comeback into boxing, I was ready to go, and my wife didn't like it at all.
I know.
But she had a vision that I was going to become heavyweight champion of the world. We never forgot that vision. And she had to be reminded of it as well, that I was heavyweight champ of the world. That kept me fighting. That kept me fighting.
His fight for the two-time championship dream,
Big George Foreman, the miraculous story of the once and future heavyweight champion of the world,
is now a story for the silver screen.
Hey, fella, come on and enjoy yourself.
Power company said we never paid the bill.
Really? There's only two things I know how to do. That's box and preach. And preaching won't pay the bills. You made me something once, Doc. You can do it again. It is my destiny to win the heavyweight championship belt again. Last time they saw me, I looked like Superman.
So now you look like the Michelin Man.
This ain't no beauty contest.
What was that process like? I mean, I can't imagine being that old and saying, okay, I'm going to get back into the ring.
And when you get to the age I was at, man, past middle age and becoming a grandpa and all of that, you got to really believe in what God tells you. And so I fought to make sure no one would take that dream away from me.
There are two fights going on in the film. There's the physical fight, but there's also a spiritual fight. What do you remember most about the spiritual fight? Is it still vivid?
In every battle, the greatest foe that we will combat isn't here.
I didn't believe in God. I really didn't believe there was a living God. I knew there were stories about it.
Wow.
My mom would talk about it, but it was like, that's for poor people. That's not going to happen. That's not really real. And so I'm in a dressing room after my last boxing match in '77 where, man, I found out that's really a living God. The fight was over then. It was a knockout. God had me.
More than 40 years after that God knockout.
Who said that? Nobody said nothing, George. George. Whoa. Your heart stopped. We thought you was dead.
I was.
Foreman's faith remains at the forefront of his heart as a mentor and minister.
What was it about the call? How did the call of God come to you? Was it in that moment that you knew immediately you wanted to preach? What happened?
After St. Juan, Puerto Rico, and I had that experience where I was dead and alive again, screaming in that dressing room, Jesus Christ is coming alive in me. I thought it would just go away. Maybe I was hit too hard, too many punches or whatever. But it never left me. The smell of death when I died in that dressing room, it has never left me to this day. And I wanted to make certain that everyone I met would know the story of Jesus Christ. Forget about George Foreman.
I'm not going to box anymore. Do you know what you're walking away from, son? I want to spread the word of God and what I saw.
It's also why he's sharing his story, the highs and the lows.
Was there anything painful to relive in telling it?
There was a painful part in the movie. My mom moving around, she always moved around. And I would go into these homes, and there was this rusty refrigerator, rusty stove that we'd always run into. People would leave those houses before we moved in, and they would leave these refrigerators and stoves, and most of them never worked. And I cried when I saw that because I had forgotten about it.
You live one way your whole life.
Heavenly Father, thank you for this food.
George should change his name from Four Man to Poor Man.
To hurt.
What's my name now, fool?
What about the absent father?
And, you know, growing up without a father, that was touching. But my mother seemed to occupy, you know, like she would love you, hug you with one hand, spank you with the other. I'm going to be mom and dad to you. You're going to be a good boy. She did the best she could.
What's life like for you today? You're still preaching?
Still a full-time evangelist with the Church of the Lord Jesus Christ. That's what I do. That is my profession. I moonlighted as a grill salesman and as a boxer for a long time, but my profession has always been that of a preacher.
His latest pulpit.
Did Muhammad Ali dance and stay away from Foreman after what Foreman did to Frazier?
Sharing his big George Foreman story on the big screen. Ephraim Graham, CBN News, Houston, Texas.
An 1,100-year-old Hebrew Bible sold for $38 million in New York recently. It's one of the oldest surviving biblical manuscripts. The leather-bound, handwritten parchment volume contains a nearly complete Hebrew Bible. Sotheby's says former U.S. Ambassador to Romania, Alfred H. Moses, bought the manuscript and donated it to a museum in Tel Aviv. Finally, this week, 56 years ago, Israeli paratroopers reunited the divided Jerusalem during the Six-Day War in 1967. As Chris Mitchell reports, every year in May, Israelis mark Jerusalem Day to celebrate that historic victory.
This is the main gathering for the flag march. From here, they'll go through the Old City on their way to the Western Wall, all celebrating what happened in 1967, the reunification of the city of Jerusalem. During that Six-Day War, Israeli Colonel Matagor announced to the world, the Temple Mount is in our hands. It marked the first time in more than 2,000 years that the Jewish people were in control of their capital.
Actually, it was there in 67.
I was a very young fighter, and at the end day, the 7 days of the 6-day war, they told us you can go home. The war is finished, and nobody went home. We went to our real home, to Jerusalem.
Former General Uzi Dayan witnessed the liberation of Jerusalem as a young soldier and went on to serve as National Security Advisor to 2 prime ministers.
It's very important today because what brings the Israelis, the Jewish Israelis together, actually Jerusalem.
Dayan's feeling was shared by many others.
We celebrate the unification of Jerusalem. At the same time, we celebrate the rebirth of the Jewish people coming back to Israel.
We commemorate the reunification of Jerusalem, which is a city older than years and years and years ago, from the days of King David. It's very, very important to the Jewish people.
We want to show that Jerusalem, first of all, is an open city to all religions. This is a wonderful country, open to everybody.
This year's march came just days after Israel fought a 5-day battle with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the Gaza Strip, who fired more than 1,400 rockets at Israel. Despite threats by Hamas that if the march went through the Muslim section of the old city, they would retaliate, the march went ahead as planned. And despite minor scuffles between some marchers and Palestinians and members of the media, the event was mainly peaceful.
We are talking about patriotism, we're talking about love of our city, which has been the centerpiece of our religion and our people for thousands of years.
Despite unprecedented divisions within Israel recently and the growing threat of a nuclear Iran, Dayan says Israel's greatest strength is still the unity of the Jewish people.
So if you ask me what is the most important strategic asset of Israel, it's not the F-35, it's not the Merkava Mark 6 or 7, it's not what we don't talk about. The most important strategic asset is the Israeli cohesion and our relations with the different Jewish communities all over.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thank you, Chris. Well, folks, that is it for this week's edition of Christian World News. Until next week, goodbye and God bless you.